Robert Mugabe will be sworn in as Zimbabwe's president tomorrow, according to his supporters. They're claiming a massive turnout in yesterday's vote, in which Mr Mugabe was the only candidate. Orla Guerin's report contains flash photography.
They came only out of fear. Many spoiling their votes or choosing the opposition, though it was out of the race. That's today's verdict from the head of a Pan-African observer mission, who says the turnout was how it looked. Very, very low, not massive as claimed by the regime. The streets of Harare are now quiet and subdued, but in the capital and the countryside there are fears of retribution against those who didn't vote. The headlines make bleak reading for all those Zimbabweans who wanted change. Most voted for it in the election's first round. This time, no need to even count the votes. It was a one-man show. Robert Mugabe's next move, swearing himself in again as president, which could happen as early as tomorrow. Many of Zimbabwe's neighbours are unhappy the election went ahead. In South Africa, ANC leader Jacob Zuma says the crisis could destabilise the region.
I don't think we want that situation. That's why we are calling for a political arrangement that must help solve the situation in Zimbabwe for the good of all of us.
The continent's leaders are gathering in Egypt for a summit of the African Union. Robert Mugabe's expected here in a day or so, welcome or not. America's now calling for UN sanctions against the regime. The view here is that that won't work.
We have gone through the regime of sanctions from the days of apartheid, from the days of UDI in Zimbabwe and many other places. History has shown us that they don't work because the leadership just dig in and feel persecuted and do even worse things. I think we must engage Zimbabwe. The route of sanctions may not be the helpful one.
But what will help with a fait accompli, with the president about to swear himself in again, whatever much of the world may say. At his last inauguration, Robert Mugabe still had some standing in Africa. He's lost much of that now, but he's ready to brazen things out. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Johannesburg.
Well, our correspondent Peter Grester is in Johannesburg as well. He explained that plans to introduce sanctions to Zimbabwe won't be welcomed by some African leaders.
Well, having Robert Mugabe at the African Union summit will probably prove to be quite a difficult dilemma for a lot of members of the organisation. Remember, the AU likes to portray itself as promoting the principles of democracy across the continent, and a lot of the members will probably, frankly, be quite embarrassed by his presence. But at the same time, the AU is anything but united on this subject, and it will probably find it almost impossible to come up with a package of sanctions or indeed to withhold recognition, which is what the Movement for Democratic Change would like to see happen. And that's for one very simple reason. The AU is filled with members who are frankly not paragons of virtue when it comes to either democracy or human rights, and they would see sanctions as setting a very, very dangerous precedent. But frankly, the MDC, the Movement for Democratic Change, really is pinning most of its hopes on support of organisations like the AU, because it has no political leverage at home, and it really needs these international organisations to apply the kinds of pressure on Robert Mugabe that would drive him to negotiations and some kind of political settlement.
Peter Grester in Johannesburg. Well, Professor Brook Hailu Beshah is a lecturer on African affairs at the George Washington University. He joins us now from Washington. Professor, thanks for joining us. Let's just talk first of all about sanctions and the suggestions coming from President Bush. Do you think sanctions have a part to play in solving this?
Well, it might have a part to play. On the one hand, it is symbolic, but if implemented to the extreme, it might bring some effects. What the current Bush administration, President Bush, is trying to do is the State Department and the Department of Treasury are working a list of things now. What I expect is, at most, they might focus on, say, reducing the diplomatic presence here in Washington. They might ask, let's say, the ambassador to be recalled, or they might reduce the radius where the diplomats might move around, or even reduce the staff. That is on the one hand. But on the other hand, focus, I think, should be given to, when it comes to sanctions, that is banning the import and export of items coming to and coming to and from Zimbabwe. What needs to be done is focus to be done on the Republic of South Africa which takes the lion's share of this export and import, on Botswana, on Zambia, and on the Democratic Republic of Congo. Unless we have these 4 countries on board, I think whatever sanctions that might be passed will just be symbolic, would have a minimal impact.
Is it the general view in Washington that, frankly, this is an African problem that needs an African solution?
Well, I don't think so. It's an African problem, yes, but it's also a global international problem. What I mean by this is that we have the African Union, before it the Organization of African Unity. When such incidents happened, when such tyrants want to perpetuate the rule and always continuously make a theater and hold so-called free and fair elections that are all a sham, there is a deafening silence, because all of them are thinking about their own well-being, their own political stability, their own stay in power. So I think the pressure coming from Africa is too weak. We have a new organization, AU, but the Political and Security Committee of AU, or even the Sharm el-Sheikh meeting that the foreign ministers would have now, would have a minimal impact, as well as the head of state this coming Monday. So I think the European Union, the United Nations, all should come on board and put pressure on the AU itself to really act, to walk the walk and to talk. Otherwise,
so you don't expect the AU to take any serious initiative at this meeting that Mugabe is due to be at in Egypt on Monday, which gives the AU every opportunity, doesn't it? The timing's perfect.
Yes, that's the very reason and objective that the AU is in place. That's why money is spent there. That's why the AU has staff. That's why the AU had the officers, have all the organs. But when it comes to making real concrete decisions, I don't think the African political leaders, quote-unquote statesmen, are even today, in the 21st century, ready to take concrete action when it comes to thugs and tyrants like we have. We can't give credit to Robert Mugabe for the positive role he played in the fight against colonialism and as a liberator. But when the time comes to go, he should go. And the African leaders should also think in these terms and not think in terms of what I'll come next, like say in the coming 5 or 10 years, because some of them, if not all, are more or less in a similar position. Some, or if not all of them, are also had undertaken such kinds of organized, shall I say, theaters, like sham elections, under the pretext of holding it free and fair.
Indeed. Professor, we must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Professor Brook Hailu Beshah from George Washington University. Thanks a lot.